If your workplace thinks that well-being is puppies and popsicles, then this episode is for you. Getting your colleagues engaged in well-being at work can be hard, even in organisations where safety is a huge focus. It doesn't always mean they'll actually get what well-being is all about. So what can you do? Hi, I'm Sarah McGuinness, founder of Revolutionaries of Wellbeing, and I'm on a mission to break burnout culture for good. This podcast is all about giving you practical tips and ideas to create a healthier, more supportive workplace and take care of your well-being too.
And we see this with burnout in general, is those that are at greatest risk are those that care the most, right? And whether it's leaders and they care likely the most about their performance because that's how they got there. And then there's those that care the most about their people. And so for me, a lot of the coaching is around establishing those really solid boundaries.
To answer this question, I'm joined by Leora Hornstein, an award-winning wellbeing specialist at Cenovus Energy in Canada. For the record, Leora and I often catch up over time zones and continents to share ideas and chat all things wellbeing. She is an absolute superstar. Leora started her career as a nurse before moving into a dedicated wellbeing role. Today, we're going to dive into what wellbeing looks like in the energy sector and within the Canadian context. You don't have to be in either of those contexts to get a huge amount of value from this conversation. We are also going to explore the challenges that she's faced embedding wellbeing in her organisation, plus her advocacy for mental health awareness.
So a little bit about me, and as you mentioned, I'm a registered nurse. I'm a certified registered nurse and a certified occupational health nurse. And I have always been passionate about human health and well-being. And when I thought about what I wanted to do, obviously the field of nursing, I am born to serve and to help. But specifically around occupational health nursing, my desire was always around protection and prevention. So really wishing to get more upstream to help our issues and our challenges downstream. And my career over the years has shifted a number of times. And in fact, I went straight from my nursing program, my degree program, and many colleagues along the way said, well, you cannot go right into occupational health. You have to do clinical, you have to get some medical surgery background, and then you can go into occupational health. And because I'm a really stubborn human, I said, you just watch me. I just knew that was for me. And so I went right into occupational health, and I've been working in the space for a couple of decades now, and still just as passionate now as I was then, but in different ways. And so I think that's what's really incredible about this career and about this career path and trajectory is, in part, the work and development that you do and the opportunities you seize, but also in part just allowing for contexts and environments and shifts and trends to help, allowing you to keep moving and pivoting because things are always dynamic and interesting in the space.
And what's interesting, I'm just going to leap from that, is that, in Canada, what's really interesting, I think when we often catch up with colleagues overseas, people look in New Zealand and go, oh, you're so far ahead. But it's so funny because we look overseas often to, say, the US or maybe into the UK and Canada and see some amazing research and programs. So tell me, how mature is the wellbeing space in Canada?
It's so interesting, right? Don't we all have that where we're always looking over each other's fences and going, oh, well, they must have it all figured out. And look at all that amazing work coming out of, I'm doing that a lot right now. Look at all of this amazing work coming out of Australia. When in turn, we're all doing amazing work in the space. Some of us are just because of context and need of our organization, we're maybe a little more ahead in one space and maybe have opportunities in in other spaces. So in Canada, I think we were really I take a lot of pride in being one of the first countries that had a voluntary framework and a guideline for creating psychologically healthy and safe workplaces. So we've always been a little more maybe leading in the psychological health and safety space and perhaps more on the mental health side. And that's also because our healthcare system is different here, right? So we look at the US, where it's private and company funded. We have a public health system here. So organizations need to really, get at the physical health. Maybe there was a different impetus for where we could focus our efforts and maybe lead more into that mental health and psychological health and safety space. So all that to say, I think each company is doing their best and we're all doing incredible work. And we all have a long journey, tough journey ahead, because no matter what we're tackling at the organizational level, we have a myriad of societal and human challenges that will keep us, employed for quite a while. This is my hope.
I have no doubt. And I just want to pause on there because I think most people would think of Australia as the leading light. And you're right. I had forgotten, of course, that Canada did have that guide already. How much, tell me, I don't think this is entirely right that you had regulation, but there was certainly a strong emphasis, wasn't there?
Yeah, so really good point, Sarah. And so this voluntary set of guidelines, it's actually called the Canadian Standard for Psychologically Healthy and Safe Workplaces. And so that is voluntary, and it's up to organizations to use it or to stand it up in their organizations. Now, what we do have is at the occupational health and safety level, we do have code. It is primarily physical safety focused, and that's what it's most broadly known and understood for. However, what's interesting is each province has its own regulations, and don't quote me here because it's been a bit since I've kind of worked in the space to think about the nomenclature, but each province has its own. And here in Calgary, we are in Alberta, and our code actually specifically does call out psychological health and safety risks and hazards, and does say that we must manage those in the same way as we do physical safety hazards and risks. So Alberta and actually Quebec, I hear, are the two provinces where it is specifically called out. I think we are still very new in understanding what that looks like and how exactly we are to manage those and identify those. And again, some organizations are likely further ahead where that full system is happening of the assessment, identifying, acting, measuring, improving. And some companies this is still quite new for.
So let's go into that, because the Cenovus safety has obviously been a huge part of what you do. And maybe if you can give a quick brief outline of what the organisation does. But then tell me, how have you brought Wellbeing into such a strong safety-focused culture?
Yeah, it's such a good question, Sarah. And actually, I started, so just a bit of background of Cenovus. We are an integrated oil and gas company, and we are now a global company. So we have operations in Canada, operations in the US, and some operations in our Asia Pacific region as well. We are downstream, we are upstream, and commercial as well. So we are approximately 7,000 employees with a significantly sized contingent workforce as well. recently, I want to say 2020, we acquired or we merged with another oil and gas company here in Calgary. And so we are, a few years into that, but I still want to say we are merging cultures, we are merging, ways of doing things and still integrating systems. And so a lot going on. I am the only well-being specialist. So that is, it's have to be really thoughtful about how I can span and reach our broad global population in being a single person. So back to your question about safety, our number one priority is around safety, physical safety, and getting people home at the end of the day in the same way that they started work. And when I started being with the company 8 years now, I was actually on our safety team, our health and safety team, and a number of org changes. And now I sit in our HR function. And so it really speaks to something that's really important, Sarah, is whether we're talking about safety or well-being or psychological health and safety or culture, it's woven and embedded throughout the company. So, it doesn't matter really where well-being sits. You have to find your partners and your stakeholders throughout. And so for me, when we were in health and safety and there was a huge focus on safety, it was maybe, certain parts of it were much easier because safety really understands hazard, risk management, a systems approach to tackling challenges. And then when I moved over to HR, there were certain aspects in the people side that were maybe less challenging because HR is all about people and culture and employee experience. And then we have to work on the safety side too. And so a lot of my work now is to leverage our safety culture and to leverage off that safety as our number one priority, and really think about expanding views of what does safety mean, right? And that safety is not just physical safety. Safety is more than that. Safety also includes psychological health and safety, and that includes our sense of being and our sense of belonging and our sense of security. For me, it's still a work in progress of how we keep expanding that definition of safety. But that's also a great asset because I get to use the strong foundation that we have for physical safety and use that to try and expand that definition. And so that's actually what I really appreciate about psychological health and safety and using that risk-based framework is that it is much the same. So a bit different, a bit nuanced, but when you think about psychosocial risks and you think about how do we identify, how do we mitigate, how do we evaluate, and we put it in that same risk framework, it's a bit easier to conceptualize. Yeah.
That is really smart. I was just thinking, because you're starting with what people know and what they understand and building on the definition. It's almost like habit stacking, a sort of language stacking, rather than going, this is safety and this is well-being. And then well-being ends up with this. And I think this came from you talking about it as cakes and kittens. It's that, when it's seen as an extra rather than part of. And so have you found that leaders are engaged in that? Or obviously, I imagine there's a mix across your organization, but what's the response been?
There really is. And, I would say for anybody who is working in this role, you really have to, and somebody told me this a little while ago, and I just grabbed onto it because it was so meaningful, is you will have less success when you are constantly trying to push your agenda versus figuring out what is the language of the organization, the team, the leader, and how can you leverage their language, right? How can you make well-being matter to them because you're understanding and using their language. So if their language is about safety and getting people home at the end of the day, and I am talking about something as like understanding that risk profile being the same, right? We are understanding if we don't manage psychosocial risks, we can, unfortunately, and this is triggering, and I don't mean to bring up the topic of suicide, but the worst case scenario is loss of life. And that is the same for physical safety versus psychosocial safety. So that is, you really have to think about making your message and your work in a way that's meaningful for the audience that you are trying to help and support. How is it received? I think, pockets, like everybody else, there's some leaders who really understand it. There's some leaders, and when I have the opportunity, it's about asking, right? What matters to you, right? Like the puppies and popsicles. If I go in, trying to push something on them, but that's not really what they're struggling with, or what's keeping them up at night, or what their teams are struggling with, it's not going to be meaningful. And then there isn't the engagement and there isn't the uptake. So if and I can think of one specific senior leader of ours, if I say to him, what keeps you up at night? If I have to mention well-being or mental health, is, that's really easy for them to grab onto. What keeps you up at night? And that leader will tell me every time, safety. And it's that idea of fit for duty, right? Is that person's mind going to be on task and they're not worrying about their child or spouse at home, or whatever else that we can really understand as the human challenges we face. So for that leader, the safety conversation is really, really meaningful, versus another leader who may be more thinking about engagement of their team or performance of their team, or and then so you have to shift. I don't think our work changes. I think we all know that the actual work and the ins and outs don't change, but the messaging and how we relay it and how we make it meaningful does have to change.
And you touch on a good point. I mean, having to be an influencer, a communicator, an advocate in an environment where, as you say, you've got pockets of people who are really on board and some who aren't, makes it quite a challenging role, because you've got your domain of knowledge, but there's this huge amount of education that needs to happen alongside it. So tell me a bit about that. And are there any other sort of major barriers that you've experienced in trying to shift the culture?
Yeah, it's such a good point. And in a large organization, we have to understand that we have one culture that we want to aspire to, an overarching culture, but really in a large, broad, diverse organization, really what we're operating with is many microcultures. And to be doing our work effectively, you have to understand what are those microcultures. For me, one of the biggest challenges are the reach, right? How do I continue to impact more broadly? Because much the same as we all understand and experience, the leaders and teams that are coming our way they're bought in, right? They're bought in. Most of them are doing the right thing. They're leading in, those ways that are supportive of psychological health and safety. Whereas it's just more challenging to get to those who may not be. The other challenge that I have is, and I do have to remind myself at all points, that we are not a well-being company. We are an oil and gas company doing well-being. And so I would gladly sit with anybody or any leader at any point and explain how, well, if we want to be a successful and sustainable oil and gas company, we need to prioritize well-being. And yet there is still that mindset out there that this is puppies and popsicles, or I don't have any extra time for this, right? I don't have any extra time. I don't have a budget for it. And just, if we realize leaders are just as challenged with their hours in a day as anybody else is. So it's really trying to get that broad message across that this isn't extra. It's not more. It's just shifting how we do things, how we approach things, how we lead, how we think about things. It's not extra. So that's definitely a couple of challenges that hit me right off the bat.
And we're certainly seeing that with leaders across the board, just that pressure that they're under. I mean, probably the most common thing that I'm hearing leaders say to me, and I wonder if this is what you're hearing too. They say, how do I look after my own well-being and the well-being of my team and deliver BAU and deliver all these organizational change projects and not burn out myself? Like, help me. Is that what you're hearing?
Exactly. Over and over again. And I see it, especially, and we see this with burnout in general, is those that are at greatest risk are those that care the most, right? And whether it's leaders and they care likely the most about their performance because that's how they got there. And then there's those that care the most about their people. And so for me, a lot of the coaching is around establishing those really solid boundaries. And that is, we have a conversation about boundaries that is so much easier said than done, right? Especially in cultures, and it's not unique to us. It is societal in cultures that boundaries are not typically in place. They're not. And they're very, very difficult to, one, think about what actually is my boundary and why is that my boundary, right? Getting really crystal clear of what my values are. And then once we have those boundaries, to actually maintain them, right? When push comes to shove and that leader has, whatever deliverables to get done at the end of the day, and they've had zero time during the day to actually do their work, well, how is that work getting done? So it is so difficult, and it's so easy to say, oh yes, you just need to set and maintain your boundaries, and yet easier said than done. And the other point of the coaching, and I'm sure you do the same, Sarah, is really understanding that oxygen mask, right? As leaders, I know that leaders can go on for a certain amount of time, not prioritizing themselves, but there comes a point where we are all finite beings, including leaders. They're not, some of them are superhuman a bit, some of them think they're superhuman a bit, but actually we're all just humans with the exact same drivers of well-being, and they're not unique. So it's my favorite expression: if you don't make time for wellness, you will be forced to make time for illness, right? So how do you get really super clear on what's important to you? And if leadership is important to you and doing your best work and getting your team to be high performing and do their best work, you need to consider, how are you taking care of yourself, because not only is it so critically important for themselves as leaders, but also their teams and their people are watching with microscopes as to what they're doing, right? So it's one thing to say you prioritize or you care about your well-being, blah, 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 but then you're sending emails at, 11 o'clock, or you're logging into a meeting on your vacation, or people are watching that, and you're setting up what does well-being actually look like. So it's really important. Leaders are, and over again, we see this in the research, leaders are one of the strongest drivers of well-being and mental health that we have in the workplace.
And so offering that skill development and support is obviously key. But tell me, what strategies have you put in place around that? And then I also know that you've put in place a number of smaller initiatives. It's almost those little bites to continue making that big change, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And what's critically important, Sarah, is to have a strategy, is to have a holistic strategy, that this is not just about throwing spaghetti on the wall and waiting to see what sticks and what doesn't. It's about being really thoughtful of your approach and evaluating, measuring, what you've put in place, thinking about why you've put it in place, understanding why you've put what you have in place, and then measuring how is it working. Is it actually getting the intended outcomes that you were hoping for? And being open to shifting and adjusting along the way. So part of that strategy is thinking about the big rocks, right? What are your big rocks? What does the roadmap look like? Like, where are you today and where do you wish to go to? I have a really hard time with this because in the well-being space, things change so rapidly, right? If we look at internal context, but then also external context and trends and threats that are coming to our well-being and what we need to meet and match along the way. But it's still really good to have a picture of, well, what does best look like, right? What does okay look like? What does good look like? What does best look like? And what practices are going to get us from okay, or maybe not even quite okay yet, to good, and then to best. So we need to be really thoughtful of those big rocks. But then along the way, what's the low-hanging fruit? And this will change and shift as you hopefully bite and eat the fruit along the way. Hopefully you get to the next low-hanging fruit. But what are those small, accomplishments that we can grab onto as wins? So for example, for us, it's skill development for leaders is mental health training. And we offer mental health training for our leaders. And also, just last year, I stood up a new course for our employees and leaders it's called Mindset, Unlocking Mindset Performance Training. And so that's thinking about taking control of our mindset to pursue our goals and to see, a lot of it's based in kind of mindfulness and positive psychology and practical optimism, but also just leveraging, what's our power? What do we have agency over for our leaders too? So we do have that true mental health training, and then this course. And then also thinking about other opportunities that are happening in the company. For example, we have a leadership development training course. And so I've been able to embed our mental health training right into that leadership development program. So that was a huge win of recognizing that leaders leading with mental health in mind is not separate and distinct to how our leaders lead day to day. It is part of our leadership development and upskilling our leaders. So That training is one way, and then also encouraging, finding those champions, finding those senior leader champions that can help influence messaging within their team, and then that then influences other teams, and that is how we change and shift culture. So it's very broad. We do have to think about this as a really multi-pronged way and approach. But so much of it is, for many leaders, these skills are innate and inherent and they come easily. And for others, they don't. And it doesn't mean they can't be developed. We just need to invest in that skill development and help them understand the value of human-centric leadership.
And actually, I'm really pleased you picked up on that word champion, because I've just written down on my notes, Wellbeing champions, ? So you've got your champions who are leaders. Do you also have a grassroots movement of champions?
We do. So this is really great and a really big win we had last year. So we have a mental health program. We actually partner with the Canadian Mental Health Association on their workplace mental health program. It's called Not Myself Today. It's an incredible program. So we stood up that program in 2018. And as part of that, the program speaks to three audiences. So the program leader, who'd be myself, our people leaders and or people leaders / ambassadors, and our general employee population. So that ambassador group was a really grassroots, organic mental health champion network that has grown and developed over the last several years. And last year, we stood up a formal, we call them inclusion networks, which is actually our ERGs, our employee resource groups. We have 6 of them at Cenovus, and we stood up a new inclusion network specifically for mental health. So we now have an employee-led resource group with an executive. We have 2 wonderful executive sponsors. It is formalized. There's a set of regulations, guidelines, practice, etc. And we're growing that network, and they're doing incredible work and really helping. So when I spoke about the challenge of being one individual with such a great reach, that is how we influence and impact at that macro level, is by using and accessing those network members. And I can already tell, the group launched formally in January. I can already see how much it's helping me to get messaging across, and even something as simple as tools, like physical tools, just the ability to get the physical tools to our on-site network members is huge. And then, of course, it's that two-way feedback, right? So it's me, filling them in on what do we have coming, what can you get involved with, what can you share with your teams and encourage engagement with. But then also there are boots on the ground, right? So they're coming back with, here's what we're hearing, here's what we're seeing, here's what the challenges are, here's what we need. So it's a really remarkable channel to enhance well-being and leverage off the good work that's happening at a corporate level, actually make it really meaningful at that local level.
And there'll be quite a few on the call who will have Wellbeing Champions groups. And so I'd love to know, have you had any lessons learned from the group so far? Anything that's come up? I mean, you talked about boundaries, and I know in our training that's one of the things we talk about is, as a wellbeing champion, once people know you and they trust you, then you end up with all these issues around boundaries. But tell me, what have you learned?
It's like you can read my mind, Sarah, because I was actually the first thing that came at me pretty quickly that, live and learn, right? We are living and learning each day. And because ours is specifically mental health, and of course, many of our leaders of that group or members of that group have lived personal experience, and people were approaching them with everything. And these are, and over again. And now we have, a true set of guidelines. Our legal team has helped, and our security team per se, or our integrity hotline team has helped develop a guideline which stipulates we are peer supporters. We are not professionals. We are not here to diagnose or evaluate or to treat. We are here to listen. And I know that the training and support that I provide is constantly on that message, right? Is you are there to listen in a way where people want to share, right? We cannot ask people to share more than they're willing or ready to share. But really, your main role is as a connector to the right resources and the right support. So right off the bat, we had to set up a very clear framework. If this certain scenario happens, or if this situation happens, or if this emergency happens, here's what you need to do. Here's who you need to call. And of course, we are humans, right? So defining and actually putting a box around, well, what is a true emergency? When do we call 911 versus when do we call our, suicide helpline? Well, that's really challenging for people who are not experts in the space to be able to recognize and identify. So a lot of guidelines set up, and really the hope that our folks will, should they find themselves there, that they would err on the side of caution, but also understanding confidentiality and privacy concerns with those that are sharing, because this is a workplace context. So really a lot. And then to your point is that heaviness of what you're holding, right? Because that group or any of us who work in the space, once you hear something, you cannot unhear it, right? And that is information that somebody has entrusted on you. That is, we're not talking about, I bought a new pair of jeans today. This is somebody's life, their whole life, right? And you've earned a privilege to hear it and receive it. We need to make sure that we are a safe container for that information. We know what to do with it. We know when and what parts we need to action on versus what parts just live with us forever. And that is a lot of heaviness. So really emphasizing self-care, really emphasizing the resources that we have for that team of people to reach out to debrief, to think about their self-care. What do they need in the moment? And what do they need so that, for some of this, it could be very triggering for them with lived experience or not. But again, once we have that, it does sit on us and it weighs on us. And especially for so many, they're empaths by nature. We need to be very clear about our boundaries and how we protect ourselves.
And that caring for the carers, isn't it? It's just huge.
It's just huge, and especially in the space. And it really does weigh on me because these are volunteers, right? These are volunteers. They're doing it out of the pure, really goodness of their heart. And so me thinking about how we protected them just as much as like the service that they're providing, but how do we protect them? And we've already, it's a number of months, we've already had a few like leadership team members leave and resign, and I fully appreciate and give them all the respect to do that, because if it's not a great fit, or you have too much going on in your role, or it's just taking a toll in a different way, I always say you first, right? It has to be you first. It's much like a leader. If you're not protecting yourself and you are that sponge and you are just letting everything come your way, we're gonna see you with your own challenges, and we absolutely don't want that, right?
So key. I'm going to shift slightly to what I think you're also watching in part of this too, which is around those measures. What are you tracking? How do you make sure that you're able to prove that all these initiatives are working? And what are some of those measures that you look out for that are like your North Star or those sorts of things?
So I love this conversation, and I also cannot wait until some very smart people somewhere in this world come out with a standardized set of measurements for well-being. I cannot wait for that to happen. And I think that is truly one of the greatest challenges we have working in this industry, is that we don't have, like, if we look at physical safety, we understand measuring. I'm not sure if it's the same for you, but we measure TRIF, right? Total recordable incident frequencies. And so we really understand what does that mean. Whereas well-being, well, what I tell you, I look at and I watch might be similar to you, but may not be. And so when we think about how do we hold leaders and organizations accountable, and how do we really know that what we're putting in place is actually effective and working, well, without that standardized set of measurements, it's so challenging, right? So I feel like a lot of it is very standard. So we're looking at our health data and our absence and our disability management data. So leaves data. That is an indicator. It's not the full story to me, because that is very lagging data. Like, at that point, our people have already left the workforce. We look at our benefits usage, our utilization. We look at our drug utilization. We look at our medical provider utilization. We actually offer tremendously generous mental health benefits, so psychology benefits. We're very leading in the space, which I'm very proud of. And so looking at not just, how much people are using, but are they reaching the maximum of their allowance, to understand what that looks like. And then on the leading side, looking at, we do an organizational health survey, which is our engagement survey. And last year, another great success was being able to stand up a well-being index as part of that. So we had a set of questions that were very specific to well-being, and then we were able to pull in questions around diversity and inclusion and leadership and form a well-being index. So now we actually have a baseline to look at, which is really exciting. Questions like, does my leader care about my health and well-being? Our programs and resources are valuable. I can't remember the exact wording, so don't quote me there. But it was a set of questions that will help us to make decisions as we go forward. So that's a big one for us. But then also looking at our people data, right? Something that's important to me is thinking about our vacation utilization. Are people having an enormous amount of carryover or vacation that's just lost that they're not able to use? PTO, so personal time off. Are people actually using time that's allotted for them? Something I would love to get to, Sarah, but really challenging, is looking at email or Teams. We mostly use Teams usage after hours, right? How many people and for how long are working as not part of work hours, and Of course, that's a bit more nuanced now that we work in more flexible work environment, but we are generally as a standard kind of daytime set hours. So like much in the well-being space, we can look at a number of things, and then we really, we can look at the quantitative data, but we also really have to think about the qualitative data, right? The like really getting and engaging with our employees and our like employee network and our members and our leaders, and what are we hearing? What are our HR business partners hearing? What are our safety teams hearing, to really get a sense of what's trending, what's happening, so that we can inform a bigger picture of what's going on. I wish it was so simple. I wish it was as simple as we have a couple of platforms, online platforms. That's so easy. I can look at engagement. I can look at how many people logged in to see how many videos on any certain amount of time, and really how meaningful is that, right? So for me, the well-being data question is really what's available to us, but really how do we use that to understand a truer picture of what is going on with our people, and how can we make our greatest impact.
I'm going to pick up on that. One of the things I loved in terms of the measures that you talked about was around what's the behavior we're trying to impact, and what's the measure of that. So say, for example, it's the measure of hours on the computer, and you're looking then at email data, like such a specific one. What advice would you provide to everybody listening, sort of 1 to 3 little tips from your experience around, well, anything that we've talked about?
Oh, such a good question. I would say for me, and I've done a lot of soul searching around this, is stay connected to your purpose, right? In doing this work, what is your why? And for me, a lot of that is redefining what success looks like. And so a really quick, tangible example is we held a mental health panel last week. It was Mental Health Week here in Canada, and our turnout, on paper was not exactly what I was hoping for, which can seem quite disappointing. But when I really reframe and I think about, okay, well, if that session had a positive impact, or left a mark, or left one individual with a renewed sense of hope, that's success. That's what success looks like. Another tip is, yes, we talk about, grassroots champions, but find your champions. Find who those people are in the organization that you're going to be able to leverage to sponsor. And then, we all understand the difference between mentors versus sponsors, but this is an area in a space that we really have to think about who's going to help champion this. And the other part is, and we spoke about this, that's self-care part, because some days the wins are enormous and they feel really elating, and they are just, leave you feel like you're walking on air, like you've actually truly had an impact. And other days you just feel a little bit like constantly pushing that very heavy rock uphill, and you go, why am I still doing this? And on those days, those are the days where you have to care for your soul and think about, okay, this was just a day, tomorrow will be a new one. So that's my 3 tips.
Thanks again for joining us today. If you found this discussion valuable and you're hungry for more ideas, head to the Revolutionaries of Wellbeing website at rowwellbeing.com. That's rowwellbeing.com. Here you can join the revolution, explore more resources, events and tips to help you break burnout culture for good, and you can register to attend our live recordings and be part of the conversation on the day. To those in our network, thanks again, and we look forward to catching up with you really soon.